If you want the full name, it's John Camillo William Louis Todesco. When I was born, they tried to get all the, I guess I was the first grandson on both sides, yeah. September 12, 1932. Well, the city of Port Arthur, but you know, at that time, most people say that were pregnant and going to deliver, they went to Port Arthur or Fort William a week in advance, and so that's where I was born, and then came back here, yeah. Well, I considered it my home until the summer of 1956, when I, in effect, struck out on my own finally, you know. My maternal grandparents were, not my paternal. My paternal grandparents were born in Italy. Okay, my spouse was Margaret Ann Farrell. She grew up in London, and we were married September the 5th, 1958. A mutual friend introduced us at a social function at university. You know, four, and Charles, Charlene, Joanne, and Laureen. Laureen is deceased, so the remaining children are, I chose not to be specific, in the 40s and 50s, yeah. I don't think they would object too much to being branded with that. Three, two who are in their 20s, early 20s, and one who's currently in the lower grades of grade school. Two different families there. I was a manager in industry for quite a few years, then I went into education. And in education, I actually started, the first teaching I ever did, I did in university. Then morphed into secondary school teaching, and then the community college system that was created in Ontario back some years ago, yeah. Yes, I did a lot of volunteer work, a fair amount of volunteer work back when I was employed. I decided that once I would retire, I didn't want to be pegged down by volunteering with some organization that was going to conflict with what I wanted to do. Okay, if I wanted to travel or something like that. So I did my volunteer work while I was working. So I was, and I'm just guessing now, something like 9 or 10 years with the United Way of Sarnia-Lambton, and was chair of the board. And likewise, I was associated with the Sarnia District Children's Treatment Center. And first I was on its Board of Education. Those were known as hospital boards of education, where you were appointed by the Minister of Education. And we led, I should put this in, we led the province by discontinuing having a dedicated schoolroom in a treatment center like that. Get the kids into an existing school, okay? So we're the ones who first self-destructed in that respect and led the province that way. So that was good. And then, so when I was no longer on that board, I then joined the treatment center's board of directors. And I was the chairman of the board for 2 years. So, in fact, I was the first person that was ever chair of that board for 2 consecutive years. So, what I remember is it was a really a small, friendly town, and quite frankly, virtually everybody in town all rowed or paddled in the same direction. Okay, there was very, very little controversy in the town that I recall anyway as a child, and of course those memories are from the latter part of the Great Depression and then all during World War II, and so yeah, it was a good place to grow up. It was a good place. It was very friendly. Yeah. of course, there were a lot of boats here, being a commercial fishing town, and that was kind of neat, seeing all the boats going out and everything like that, because a lot of those commercial fishermen were lone operations, just one person and one open boat, and everything like that. And yeah, at a very young age, I became very enamored with steam locomotives. Okay, I just loved them as a kid. And quite frankly, to this day, I'm still amazed at the fact that you could take something as free as water and a flame and produce all that power. Okay, whereas with an internal combustion engine like we have now, you know, well, fine, you have to get the crude oil, you got to refine it and everything like that, and then the power comes from an explosion. But that came from two things that we have all around us, in fact, fire and water. The Women's Institute was very active in this town, and my mother was very active in it, and so, you know, when I was a child, these streets weren't plowed. Okay, that didn't happen until after they started to build Terrace Bay. Then the road was opened up in the wintertime and everything like that. We had snowdrifts. There used to be 3 huge snowdrifts between my place here and the school, which is the Willows bed and breakfast now, down on that property. There used to be 3 huge snowdrifts in the way. It was just a walked-on path all the way around town, okay, that you walked on. Just the width of people walking, that's all, yeah. Yeah, everything was in that one-room school. When the teacher was Raymond Kenny, and I liked that simply because I was always excited about school starting in September, because by then it's starting getting a little boring. You could only do so much fishing or go down and hang around the sawmill or something like that, or the docks and everything like that. It was great to get back into school. And what I really liked was that, you know, in a one-room school like that, a lot of people never experience what I'm going to say now, and that is that, fine, you have your lessons for the day, and then the teacher has to move on for the other 7 grades. So all the grades above me, I'd say by the time I was in grade 5, maybe grade 6, I knew everything up to the end of grade 8. I knew it then, all right, so it made it pretty easy after that, yeah. The rink was on CPR property up in front of the 2 churches on the back street here. So we were, it was an outdoor rink, and it was a community effort, and if you were going to use it, you were expected to work at it, okay. So the men did the flooding and everything like that, but during the day and after school, a lot of people would be up there shoveling the thing off it. It always seemed to have 2 feet of snow on it. So. And that was great, because, you know, the neat thing about it was is that you compared, say, to a town with organized rinks, so, you know, they had to pay to skate. Well, we didn't have to pay to skate. You just put in your labor, you went out and skated. Okay, so that was great. Yeah, yeah. 1st of July was a big day here when I was a child. Children's races, bicycle races, fireworks were quite common. Of course, we sold them. My folks sold them here in the store, and then every night after dark there was a major display way out in the harbor. They'd taken old, you know, being a commercial fishing town, there were all kinds of old derelict or semi-derelict, to say, like punts or rowboats. They'd fill one of those boats with spent pond nets, trap nets, which were tarred. Okay, you didn't catch fish by the gills in them. It was like a giant minnow trap, okay? So they filled up the putt with that, and then they put all kinds of Roman candles, and we used to have skyrockets then, which are not really legal, I guess, anymore, because a lot of people ended up being killed by the sticks falling out of the air and piercing them and things like that. So there'd be hundreds of them, out there, and they anchored out the harbor, and it was a major undertaking, one of the best I've ever seen, quite frankly. Spent a lot of time. I had a sandbank at the back of the house here. I used to play with trucks, and there was one on the street down here too. Enjoyed playing with toy trucks and everything like that. And once I got a bicycle, I don't know, be about 9 years old, I guess, or something like that. Spent a lot of time going around on the bicycle and everything like that, and it sure made it easy. And of course, I used to do a lot of fishing and exploring around. My two closest friends and I think we're pretty unique like that in this town, with one possible exception. But like we spent oodles of time in the bush. Really loved the bush, and so we were always poking around back up in behind here in the hills, up over the top of the hills, and etc. And it was interesting, you know. We never ever got lost or anything like that. Our dead reckoning was pretty doggone good for young kids, and but there's a whole series of inland lakes up behind the town going west out of here, and I don't know if anybody fishes them anymore or not, but we do all the paths into them, and we fish them for speckled trout and everything like that. Plus, we were three curious kids. We ran across some kind of oddball things, and a couple of which I'm not even going to mention here. Yeah, things that we discovered back there and everything like that, and we learnt a lot from that. Some of the things had an element of, I wouldn't say danger to them, but you know, we realized that there were things that you shouldn't fool around with, and we didn't do that. So we were in the bush a lot, yeah. Every fall and winter, we used to snare rabbits. Well, they're really snowshoe hares, but and when you think about it, when I think about it, World War II, with the rationing that went on, meat rationing, for example, well, we had a ready market here for rabbits, okay, 15 cents each or 2 for a quarter. I don't think it was legal then, just like it's not legal now, but that's what we used to do, and we didn't always have a stock, but yeah, we had some customers around here. If I had rabbits, I could go over and knock on the door and say, would you know, like a couple of rabbits, take a couple of rabbits. And, well, okay, fine. Yeah. So we did that. We actually used to hunt partridge and grouse with slingshots. Came pretty good with it. It's amazing how good you could come with a pocket full of stones and some rubber bands cut from a tire tube out of a tire. Yeah. And yeah, so we did that, and we did a lot of fishing. Yeah. Yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, we used to pick berries back up here. You go back up in the rocks up back at Rossport, the blueberry bushes all over. At least there were then, and I presume there still are. And I'm going to digress just for a moment on that. One of the interesting things, and I think it shows in one of these pictures, is that if you were out on the lake, now let's say in the late, I'm thinking late 1930s, 1940s, if you were out on the lake and looking inward into the harbor, behind the town, all you could see was gray, and that was rock, just gray rock. Now there were pockets of vegetation and some bushes growing in them. And if you're out there in the lake now in the same spot and you look in the summertime, all you can see is green. Because the trees, the bushes and the trees have become tall enough, they've hidden any of the bare rock, okay? But it actually used to, you know, well, what is it, 10,000 years since the ice moved out of this area, and yeah, that rock showed when we were a kid. It was, you know, it was kind of depressing looking at all that gray rock sitting up there, whereas now it's beautiful. It's nice green trees. Yeah. So, yeah, I've seen that in my lifetime. Yeah. 2 boys and I, and they lived on the in the north part of town and had a big piece of property and behind a pasture kind of. They always had a cow, and I don't know where their property ended up there. Probably somewhere where now would be the cutoff on the highway somewhere up there. But yeah, we knew that bush bite, but, you know, and just for something to do. I actually learned how to fell a tree from those two boys. One boy was a year older than me and one a year younger. And they had learned that from their father, okay. So for something to do, we'd go, we'd cut trees back up there, and then we made bunkers on our toboggans, and we'd haul these trees home, and because we all burnt wood, at least in the kitchen stove, okay, and like that. So, but that was fun. But we were active. We were very, very active. Yeah, it was a great place for swimming. The sandbar, which is down. Well, it's now the causeway across to Nickel Island down here. See, that was all open down there, and there was a current in against the shore, so there were a couple of fairly deep pools. They'd probably be 4.5, maybe 5 feet deep, and so you could swim there all summer and everything like that. And it was a lot, you know, being shallow on the whole. Well, you got out in the middle between the mainland and the island, and a lot of summers the water would only be up to your ankles, and so yeah, the water was warmer down there than it was off the docks. Sometimes you dove in off the docks, you know, you couldn't get your breath for a few seconds. Yeah, I used to read a lot. I really did read a lot. We got, at that time there were 2 newspapers in Thunder Bay, one in Fort William, one in Port Arthur. We got both of them, and as a kid, and of course with World War II also, I spent a lot of time reading the newspapers. And I used to read some fiction, and one thing that I really enjoyed, every Friday evening, I guess it was, the Toronto Star Weekly would come in on the mail train, and it was a good publication. First of all, it had a big comic section in it, and that was great. And once again, with World War II and everything like that, there were some great written articles in there, and I gobbled that up. I really enjoyed reading, yeah. And as I say, I did read a fair amount of fiction as well, but which is something that once I finished high school, I've never really read anything like that again, just simply because I got tired of it, I guess, and everything like that, and there were alternatives, such as television or something like that, yeah. Oh boy. Well, you know, the first thing that I put down there is the one that sticks out the most in my mind. I grew up in a time when not everybody had personal transportation, i.e. an automobile. That was exacerbated perhaps, or was caused to some extent by the fact that I was born and grew up during the Great Depression, which was immediately followed by World War II. Now, in the Depression, people couldn't afford things. A lot of people couldn't afford something like a car. And in World War II, well, maybe you could afford a car, but there wasn't a car to be had because of the war effort. And so I did a count here, but what is it? I remember back when I was a kid, there were, I think, 3 cars in town, 2 pickup trucks, and 1 3-ton dump truck. And then after World War II, the place was flooded with automobiles and pickup trucks and everything like that. That's the biggest change. And it wasn't just the availability of them, but that I recall, you know, a changing pattern there. If Joe Blow wanted to go to Nipigon, well, Joe Blow went out and got into his or her car, okay, and drove to Nipigon, whereas in the previous years, you couldn't do that because there was no car to go in. So you had to use public transportation, which meant passenger trains. And so, yeah, so that was a definite change, a definite change. people had a lot more freedom then at that time, at that point, to go and do what they wanted to do, when they wanted to do it, and whether or not it was economical or not didn't matter, okay, yeah, they did it, yeah. And the other thing was, is that in that time there, somewhere in there, yeah, okay, so those are my university years too, so that meant train travel, and as opposed to air travel, there was, Transcanada Airlines did exist then out of Thunder Bay, but, you know, I think you had to have pretty deep pockets if you wanted to fly, like we can fly nowadays, okay. So for distance travel, it was railway, on the railways. And in, you know, my time, that's changed to, well, try and take a passenger train from Schreiber to Toronto. You can't do it. 1948, 5-passenger Chrysler coupe, great big checkerboard grill on it. And so that was the first vehicle we ever owned here that had a radio in it. So we'd go out in the evening and go someplace, go to Nipigon to see a movie, go to Schreiber or Terrace Bay to see a movie, listen to the radio. And one of the principal radio stations that we listened to here was WJR out of Detroit. In my time, the town got telephones. Now, at one stage of the game, there were perhaps about 4 telephones in town that worked through a switchboard that sat against that wall over there. Okay, that my mother used to operate in her ho-ho spare time. And everybody had different rings, you know, a different series of rings. I think ours was one long, one short, okay. And it was up at the inn, and then for Nipigon Bay Fish Company, and I think there was one other. And that expanded to about 7 or 8 telephones in town. And at that time there was no more switchboard there. It was one line that came into Rossport from Schreiber. Everybody was on the same line. And my sister, who was 6 years younger than me, she and her friends at that time used to all get on the telephone, say in the evening, okay, they'd ring up all their numbers, everybody get on there, and they'd have a visit. And it was so great, it was so great, they didn't have to go to the house. And so, you know, it was old technology, but look what you could do with it. It was so simple to do that. You know, just ring all the numbers, and they'd all get on there. And so we had that, and then of course, okay, think about television. Television. I can remember sitting in the living room with my father, who was born in 1891, and I remember him saying to me one evening, you know, Jack, I never thought that at some time in my lifetime I would be able to sit in my living room and see moving pictures in my living room that in effect comes through the air, you know, that type of thing. So that was really a major breakthrough. And then, of course, when it comes to other changes, okay, computers, period. Yeah, I was in on the beginning of the computers back on the old punch card systems and that. You could see the changes that computers were going to make, okay. And I would think that on the whole, those of us who thought about it, our expectations were greatly actually exceeded by what ended up being done and what could be done. You know, computerization, you know, instant change, instant access, instant information. For example, if I was going to university, I'd get a check from home made out to me, and I had a bank account where I was going to university. Well, I'd have to wait always a week for that check to clear before I could access the funds that were theoretically in the account, unless I wanted to pay for a long-distance telephone call to, in effect, have it taken out of the account here at that point. And long-distance telephone at that time was pretty expensive, so you didn't do that. Whereas right now, well, okay, fine. The bank in Schreiber and the bank in Toronto can access the same bank account at any time on their computer system. So that was really something. The internet is mind-boggling. It's really mind-boggling. Who would ever thought we'd have something like that, so readily accessible? Okay, the changes in medicine, for example, okay, the changes in medications, for example, the advancements that have been made there, and things like artificial joints that you could obtain now, and microsurgeries, keyhole surgeries and things like that. And the brain, well, heart transplant, organ transplant, let's put it that way, okay. There was nothing like that. My goodness, I had a father-in-law that I never met because he died as a young man with a very bad heart. And if he had lived 20 years later, yeah, I think there are a lot of things that exist now that people probably take for granted as they're basically so simple. Well, they must have always been there. Well, they weren't always there. Fast food restaurants and drive-through retailing. In other words, like the fast food restaurants do that a lot. They have their drive-throughs. Well, there's other retailing that's done through drive-throughs too. Like, I don't know about in Canada, but in the United States there actually are drive-through funeral homes where you can drive in and the person who has passed away is lying there, and you pay your respects and drive out. Now, how common they are, I don't know, but I know that they exist because I run across it more than once. But, I mean, that's taking it to an extreme, there's no doubt about it. Well, yeah, I've got current hobbies, and they kind of go back to when I was a kid. Love the bush, I love the bush. I don't really mean to digress here on camera, but one of the reasons why I haven't had this deteriorating knee done yet is because I'm trying to keep it till I get into moose season, after moose season's over, okay. I live back in the bush. I took a big van and made it into a camper, and so we stay back in the bush. So I like hunting, I like fishing, and it all goes back to when I was being a kid, really. They are my principal hobbies, and other than that, not really too much. I'm not a golfer or anything like that, and I still read a lot, but it's mainly newspapers and certain magazines that I subscribe to. And I do watch a fair amount of television, but I like documentaries, news. I might watch a couple of news channels every evening just to get a different pitch on things. And well, yeah, a couple. I kind of looked at that and thought, no, I don't have any stories. Well, I guess I do have some stories, okay. Across the street here, there are 2 vacant lots. And those 2 lots used to belong to the Boone family. Now that's a name, I don't know if it's still common in Schreiber or not, but I remember Mr. Charlie Boone, who was a locomotive engineer and a commercial fisherman. The commercial fisherman part of it comes back to Rossport, where he grew up. Well, their home used to be down there, and across the street, the land goes down in 2 terraces. The bottom terrace is down and against the lake level. Well, there used to be a house down there when I was a little kid, real young. And it had an upstairs in it, so I'm pretty sure it was a 1.5-story house, not a 2-story. And it was kind of a scare. It was left to go derelict when the Boones moved to Schreiber, I guess. And it was a scary place to kind of look in the door and everything like that. And it was even scarier because they had a root cellar into the bank behind the house. I don't know if you know what a root cellar is or not, but they had a root cellar there, and it had partially collapsed, and we kind of like go in it a little ways, and it was dark and spooky and everything like that, and then run like mad out of it and everything like that. Anyway, one 1st of July, an uncle of mine, who then would be, I guess, a teenager, was working here at the store, and some guy, a stranger, and I guess was somewhat semi-inebriated anyway, walked in and bought some Roman candles, not Roman candles, skyrockets. And he was going to go down to that house. That house had a true fireplace in it, like a stone fireplace. Like you could look in and look up and see the sky. And he was going to go down, and he had been down there, I guess, and thought he was going to shoot off some skyrockets up the chimney of the fireplace. My uncle, I guess, said, no, I didn't think he'd be successful. Anyway, they entered into a big bet, a whole 25 cents. Well, so the guy went down there and he lit off the skyrockets, and you know what happened. They didn't clear the chimney, and they bounced around the house, and the house burned down. So that's the story for that. It was just a little different. Now, we not only had these fireworks later on out in the harbor, but we had a house burning down on the shoreline too. Well, over on this other side, apparently back, and I think this might have been before I was born, there used to be an old hermit that lived down there, and he had simply burrowed into the bank, just like the root house, okay, and shored it all up in there. I guess had a stove in there and everything like that. And all I know is that this old man lived down there, and I guess I understand people would, you know, bring some food down to him. But he probably did something to earn, to, you know, scratch out a living as well. But I don't know much about it. But yeah, the older people used to talk about the old hermit that used to live down there. Another one is that every spring, the ice-breaking tug from Thunder Bay, the James C. Whalen, used to come in here, and if I remember correctly, one of the things it had to do, it had to pick up the lighthouse keeper here, who was a Mr. Sutherland, and take him out to Battle Island Lighthouse. But at the same time, the Whalen would, now the water out beyond the harbor would be open then, but the harbor would be ice-locked, so it would break up the harbor to give the commercial fishermen the opportunity to get out to set nets sooner. And so every spring when the James C. Whalen would come into view out here somewhere around about the point, and we were aware of it in the school, okay, that, oh, this is going to be great, because the chair of the school board, who was usually, I think, Mr. Fred Giroux, you'd hear this knock on the front door of the school, and it would be Mr. Giroux out there knocking, and Mr. Kenny, the teacher, would go down to the door, and there'd be a little discussion. Then Mr. Kenny would come back and say, okay, school's dismissed for the day, because that was the big thing that James Whalen was out here. So all the kids that were like of any size of looking after themselves at all ended up down on the government dock, and then ended up on the Whalen. Now, okay, so when all the kids that were coming were on the Whalen, then they would leave the dock and go and break up the harbor. And the big thing is the bigger kids, and you think of it now in our litigious society that we have now, and insurance limitations and everything like that. All the kids that were big enough would go up in the bow of the tug, which had a high railing that would probably come up at least waist high, probably a little bit higher, and hang over the end, because the principal way of breaking thick ice was for the Whalen to run up on top of it and then crash through. And that was a great thrill. You know, you think of the danger of it and everything like that. And yeah, I can remember being up there and saying, oh, you know, and actually being frightened, but but I was holding my place up there because I wanted to see this happen. And like nowadays, you wouldn't even be able to get on the whale. Oh, and the other thing is then as they went around the harbor breaking the ice up and everything like that, if you went past the galley, the cook was there with a bunch of pies, and he'd catch you a slice of pie, which you'd eat in your hand then, okay, type of thing. So that was a big day when the James C. Whale had come in here, yeah, when we were kids, yeah. You know, promotionally with respect to Rossport, it's still a neat town. There's no doubt about it. And quite frankly, if you drive the North Shore of Lake Superior, there are 3 great views. One of them is as you come over the overhead down here near the other side of McLean's Creek, where you can see the whole expanse out here. That's a great view. Another one is the top of Kama Hill going up towards Nipigon. But the most photographed place on the North Shore of Lake Superior is right across the street. It's just like that view. And I can remember working in the store, you know, as a teenager and that, and because the whole family worked in the store and that. And we'd have people come in, tourists come in and say, you know, you got the most beautiful view here in the world. And you'd say, oh, I'm so tired of looking at it, you know. But it is, it's really neat. The other thing that makes Rossport so vivid and makes it so desirable is, it's the one place that I know of on the Great Lakes that has got islands. Okay, this is where the islands are. When I tell people, you know, I live on a Great Lake at Sarnia, and wide open water expanse. There's not an island for hundreds of miles or anything like that. You want to go out in the lake with your boat? Well, what do? You run up the shore, okay, you run back down the shore. Here you can go places. You can go to harbors, you can anchor, you can camp, do anything you want like that. And you consider these islands, you know, there are a lot of lakes on these islands. That's how big these islands are. And when I tell this to people down where I've lived since, well, I've been down in that part of the country since 1952, I guess, going to university and what have you, and working, and they find it a little bit mind-boggling that, oh, there's that kind of access up here, and these types of things to see. And I think the islands are priceless from the standpoint of what Rossport has to offer. And of course, you'll never find a better harbor than this. This is a fantastic harbor, just a fantastic harbor. And good transportation in, Trans-Canada Highway, Canadian Pacific Railway. Well, it doesn't have much personal transportation right now, of course. So, yeah, I think the town has a lot to offer. I realize that once the fall comes around, it kind of gets gray and foreboding for some people around here, because a lot of the people are like myself. We're seasonal. We're only here. But I suspect you could develop cabin fever come about February or something like that. But that's not to say anything against the town. It's just a fact of life. Yeah, it's a good destination. It's a good place to be. There are facilities here for visitors, and it's entirely possible that more will be built. Yeah, water, islands, and you know, and the fishing has become great again. The fishing, sports fishing, has become very, very, very good once again. You know. So and then if you want other things like the hunting and that, well, yeah, it's all right here, and we don't have quite the wild we used to have. I guess I can remember as a child a couple of times caribou swam across the harbor here, not moose but caribou. The islands were full of caribou. Yeah.